Businesses have grown incredibly tired of consultants, and rightly so. We live in an industry that has, for whatever the reason, for whatever the organic evolution reason, has grown to accept a whole series of conflicts of interest within the industry and live with it as if it were the norm and as if it were right. And so there's all kinds of conflicts of interest. And one of the first, I mean, let's say the straw that broke the camel's back, in my case, that really convinced me, okay, I need to go and do it myself because this is really crap, was experiencing on client side, getting really poor consultancy and from some third party. And not only that consultancy was supposed to be unbiased and then turned out not to be so. And because there were secondary kickbacks or whatever, referral schemes and so on. So if you're a consultant, whether you're an independent or you're a bigger organization and you're supposed to help your client, whether a brand, a retailer or whatever, to take the right strategic decision and pick, for example, the right partner to develop a website, to develop an app, to whatever it is. And as a consultant, you have secondary interest in recommending A or B. That's a pretty disgusting practice, which I find highly unethical.
Hi, my name is Ron Dror, and this is Remake, a podcast about design, systems, and society. In each episode, I talk to someone who's trying to change our lives for the better in some meaningful way, whether through a new product, new venture, or new way of looking at the world. And I try to understand how they came to it, what makes them tick, and what we can learn from them. Today I'm speaking with Saverio Bianchi. Saverio's London-based strategic consultancy, Atelier and Avenue, specializes in e-commerce acceleration and digital transformation, especially for luxury, fashion, and beauty brands around the world. We discuss Saverio's journey in the business, his ideas about consulting ethics, the dangerous conflict of interest that can arise, and the value of remaining an unbiased and trusted advisor. A privilege to have you on the podcast.
Likewise. Honored myself.
Usually we start this conversation with a question that kind of opens up the discussion and makes it a little bit personal, because we usually talk about a lot of professional projects and professional things, but I think it works better when it kind of is connected to who we are as people. And so the question that I came up with to kind of start an interview is, what is something that you've believed since childhood that still drives you today? And, you can phrase it any way you want. You can think about it any way you want. You can take your time. But try to see if you can find something in your childhood, some idea, some belief that can still drive you today.
The first thing that comes to mind is certainly something that has been with me the whole time, has been very much thanks to how I was raised and very much thanks to my parents for this, is the importance of looking at who you have in front of you as your interlocutor, being able to listen, I guess, and focus and find common ground to communicate, regardless of the age difference. When I was a child and speaking with feeling very comfortable speaking with older people, like friends of the family and things like that, or teachers, or growing up in adult life, feeling very comfortable speaking with people from all different walks of life, whether that being senior people at senior executives at your first job. Never felt less or feeling better. Therefore, being able to, I used to say, being able to speak with a hobo or with a pope and having exactly the same kind of approach to wanting to listen and so on. And so I guess the value of being able and focused on listening and interacting with any kind of person has been something that got stronger and stronger over time, and something that I really believe has very being very valuable.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me based on knowing you. So how did it? You said that this was the way you were raised. Can you give me some examples of how it expressed itself in your childhood, in your upbringing?
Sure. My parents would always have friends over, friends of theirs over, and our house was usually the main place amongst all different groups of friends of the family where we would all gather, where they would all gather, and so on. And so I would be allowed to stay up late at night, and they would just, classic, I would say, Italian upbringing in that sense of being very social and having evenings amongst friends and talking and about all different kinds of subjects, and having the kids, us, being around and being able to listen and also interact sometimes. And I don't want to make it sound like they would have evenings talking about Schopenhauer and or or anything like that. It was very light. No, very light-hearted. I mean, it could get intellectual sometimes, but it was, very light-hearted and comfortable, and we wouldn't be relegated into a separate room.
Yeah.
As kids, we wouldn't be the kids, and so they would, any kids like myself and my sister, but also kids of our of their friends and so on. So I think that plus being exposed to growing up in to other situations and meeting people and colleagues and clients of my parents, because I'm son of two architects who were running their own design firm in the center of Italy where I'm from. And so I would just sometimes just as a kid wander into their design studio and just even sit around and draw or play whatever, and spend time, kill time as I liked after school, and just sit in the side of in the corner of the studio, of the design studio of the office, and just hear them speak with the clients that would walk in and so on. So being exposed to real communication of real world was I think very valuable, and that allowed me to identify that as
Mm.
something that fit well with, I guess, also the personality I was born with, and became a stronger a stronger skill that I've been honing over time, and which turns out being quite useful for the job I ended up doing.
That's so interesting. So I can definitely see how seeing another person as a person, as opposed to their role or seniority or what they can do for you,
Absolutely.
it's really helpful in actually having a human relationship with them. And did you find that this kind of expressed itself in your early career, that it kind of opened doors for you, or?
It did. It did because it would allow me to have, and I'm not particularly extroverted. I'm actually by nature quite introverted. I'm an introverted that plays extroverted most of the times, and so despite that, I could engage in conversations, and exactly like you said, seeing a person as a person and not as a role. And of course that I learned to focus this skill more and more over time. It took years to then turn it into an actual skill, but early on in the career, even in university, speaking with professors that would terrorize friends of mine, I've never had that. I've never been terrorized by by a professor, a teacher, or some senior person in school. So that definitely made it easy. And at work, it made it a lot in the early years. Definitely made it a lot easier.
Yeah, no, I'm looking at my own past now, and I'm seeing some similar patterns. Is like, professor is ornery. Kind of the assumption is, well, maybe they're going through something difficult, or they're just, that's their personality, that's who they are. Doesn't reflect on me, right? Then you kind of, if you treat them as a person, then they actually respond better
Exactly.
than if you treat them as a frightened, as a frightened student would treat an authority figure. Or
Absolutely, you validate. I mean, now with a few years, quite a few years after, you start seeing much more clearly certain kind of patterns, and so now I tend to think more in terms of okay, I have a human being in front of me, and they may be interacting with me in that precise moment in a particular way, which could sit anywhere on a spectrum of interaction, from extremely polite to tense or nervous or worried or even angry or whatever the case may be. And then my first reaction is hardly ever a knee-jerk reaction. It's more thinking, hang on a minute, why is this person feeling like this? And that's and maybe I don't have the answer on the spot. Actually, most of the times I obviously don't have the answer on the spot, and so I tend to kind of think through it a bit more and then figure out later. Hang on, kind of put a pin on it, and later on investigate what is that is pushing this person to be like this. Is it just a bad day, or are they worried because they feel threatened, for example, by and this actually happens often in my job, is you go into a business and help them understand what is it that isn't working and why isn't it working, and because aside from the experience, the fresh pair of eyes, and depending on different kinds of personalities and different kind of people, you get those that take it as an opportunity to improve and get better and learn something new, and you get those that get defensive because they fear this external person coming in and as if I were
right.
going to judge or whatever, which is obviously not what I'm there for.
Right. That's so interesting. So, now I'm kind of also in the business of consulting in a way, and often you sit in front of a person, or rather, I was for many years I've been consulting with clients on product, but that's after they've been sold, right? So I didn't have to do the sales part. Now I find myself, this might be kind of a selfish reason because I'm interested in the process, but you find myself sitting in with a person, wondering what's going on in their head, right? Like where they're like, or they say they're very interested, but then, nothing happens. And then you find out that there's politics behind the scenes that you don't understand. And you're always wondering like what's driving the other person to, and how they're making decisions. How do you approach that today when you don't have full information?
I approach it as a process, as a method, and try not to force myself to come to a conclusion or an interpretation of the state of play of who I have in front of me and the client on the spot. I guess I've developed a sixth sense or somewhat of a sensitivity where I have a good interpretation rate also on the spot, but sometimes it definitely depends from case to case. But in general, asking questions and trying to understand very much where that person plays and how their what their motivation is, what their system of incentives really is, how senior are they in the business, not in just in terms of tier of the management tier in which they sit, but what kind of seniority do they have within the business and what kind of weight do they carry. A similar person with a similar job title, with a similar kind of seniority in the business, may as well carry more weight than another one in the influencing process within the organization. And so my process is very much trying to learn and get under the skin of the business as much as possible, and genuinely understand what is motivating the reason why we're having this conversation, and how did they get to that point. Is it early on a discovery process where they're trying to make up their mind? Are they further down the sales funnel where fundamentally they've done their due diligence, they've assessed their requirements, and now they're just trying to find the right partner? And obviously, depending where they sit within that funnel, the influence is different, and the levers to play are different, and therefore the kind of cards that you should play and the levers to play are different.
Very cool. Yeah, I feel like I could ask you questions about this all day, but I think it's probably there's probably other interesting facets of your story. So I was looking at your history a little bit, and you seem to be traveling and moving quite a lot early on, right? As in school and in life. So what was that like? What was that kind of? Tell me about this journey.
It's been a journey. So first of all, I come from the center of Italy, from the green hills of Umbria, which I always recommend anyone to go and visit, right next door to Tuscany. And it's a quiet Italian province. And I've been lucky enough not just be raised in a certain way by my parents, but also have been given a lot of opportunities to actually travel and learn a language, and experiment and find kind of my way. Which, looking backwards, now that I have little kids, I'm not sure I would do what my parents did nowadays of sending me at 13 years old for the summer in England, in a family to learn English, and basically doing that every summer. That was a big testament of trust, and those were different times as well. But also, that was the fundamental thing that taught me that I actually really enjoyed to travel and really enjoyed to learn about new people, of new people, new ways of being, and really opened my mind since early days as to how there isn't just a version of the world, and there isn't just a version of what's right. That kind of planted the seed. Plus, my grandfather has always been an idol of mine for as long as he's been around, and he's been traveling the whole world, and those two things together really planted the seed for me to go and explore as much as I could and expose myself to opportunities. Being playing the cards, being try different tables, go study abroad. Before, when I was a kid and study English, go and go and study in Milan, close to Milan, when I went to university, and I go to Australia for an exchange program when I was for 6 months when I was in university, and then move to Modena and work in another city again, and then go to California, and then move to London. So and then when I started basically doing the job that I'm doing now 7 years ago, running this consultants firm, then really taking even more the opportunity of enjoying the pleasure of traveling and learning to work and live with different people from different countries. Definitely has been a process in that sense.
So cool. Yeah, I feel like I grew up in Israel, and I lived for many years in the U.S. And first of all, I love feeling when I go to a new place like I live there as opposed to just visiting.
Absolutely.
Right. So even if I go, so when I went to Thailand, I went for a month and a half. When I went, I like to go and start having a local routine and start talking to people and try to feel as much as possible of kind of the place. And it does open up, like it definitely opens up your perspective. but it also kind of creates a sense of maybe like a question of where you actually belong. Do you feel that you've had, with living in the UK for so long, what's that, where's home? Is everywhere home, or?
That is a great question. I never really felt I belonged. I have the biggest love for my mother country, so for Italy, and I adore it. But I never really felt I belonged there. I'm probably one of the few Italians you run into who doesn't care at all about football or soccer, depending on the audience that is listening to this, and a bunch of other things that were quite common. But jokes aside, I think London definitely felt the closest to home. I lived for 7 years in Modena, in the north of Italy, when I've been working in Ferrari, and I loved the place, I loved the job, loved the friends and colleagues there and everything. But it never felt like home. Milan never felt like home for the period. So probably London is without probably, is definitely the place that feels the most like home, for sure.
I can see. I mean, I feel like home in London. So, like London is so welcoming and so interesting, but it's definitely, and New York kind of has the same thing, but it was definitely a process for me to feel like, to know who I am and know what I'm missing from, for instance, Israeli society. There's certain things that I miss, so I now know that if I live anywhere else, I need to surround myself with my type of people. So, for instance, with Israel, I like people who are more warm and emotionally open, and more direct, and more, I know, less individualistic and more communal in a way, because that's what I associate with feeling like home. And so in New York, I would also gravitate toward people who maybe weren't like the classic New Yorkers. There were, people who were immigrants or people from kind of different cultures.
I think what London offers is this, Brexit aside, offers this canvas, and for sure it's very similar to New York in that sense. But this sort of canvas for really any. You could be coming from anywhere. You could be going anywhere, and being the way you are, and just still have an opportunity to be heard. And I think what I found moving to London was the best. Well, moving to London and then starting my own business were the two best decisions, professionally speaking, that I've ever made in my life. Because, first of all, moving to London, where I fundamentally knew nobody. I had two old classmates from university living here, but working in different kind of spaces than mine. So it was good to have a couple of couches to sleep on when I was coming to do interviews. But fundamentally, I entered the market as a nobody, and people would listen, and businesses, and which are made of people, obviously. And I had a culture, and still have a culture of opportunity. And so I feel here, if you're really motivated and you're really passionate about a certain kind of professional direction, you can get a material number of opportunities. And it doesn't matter how old you are, and it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter, where you're from. It doesn't matter the color of your skin or anything else. And there's, I've definitely seen lots and lots of opportunities in my case, and friends' cases, and other people that I ran into. So I definitely love that, and I like the general way of doing business and just of being of the Brits.
Yeah, that's so cool. I got a little bit of a taste of that in my last visit to London, and now I'm excited because there's another trip to London coming up soon, September. So yeah, I love it there. every time I visit, I'm just like, wow, I can see myself living here.
It's buzzing. I'm very partial to London.
Yeah, super cool. So you've worked for a few very large companies like Ferrari, you mentioned, and L'Oreal, and then you kind of transitioned into starting your own consultancy. So how do you think of the work you do today? How would you define it?
Fundamentally, there is a talent gap in the market, given by the fast-moving nature of e-commerce and digital, and there is a gap in between what the various players can offer. And fundamentally, what I mean by that is you have your big consultancy firms, you have your agencies of all sorts, from media to design and development and so on and so forth. You have tech platforms and blah, blah. And then you have your freelancers, kind of standalone free players that help businesses. And fundamentally, the way I see it is when I started a business, it was after many years on client side, first in Ferrari and automotive, and then made this double backflip from automotive to beauty, which was quite interesting. I'm so excited. I'm so happy that happened because I really enjoyed that space. Um, and the sum of those experiences as an employee basically allowed me to understand that there was a gap in the market in terms of offering, and also made me learn that I really did not like the way consultants and consultancies in general were operating with clients. And I guess that plus having being raised in a family of people who are free professionals who run their own business and so on, I've always had the desire of running my own thing. And so 1+1 basically convinced me before I had kids and so on to take the leap and go on and consult. But the way I would describe it is genuinely. I genuinely get a kick from helping people becoming a better version of themselves within their business, and getting their businesses to become a better versions of themselves. Seeing the process, I'm in love with the process as much as I am with the output, and so taking people by the hand through methodology, through experience and so on and so forth, and taking them by the hand to realize that they could do much more and they could do much better in the way they run their business, and seeing them doing it because we stick around to help them turn that plan and that strategy into practice. That's what I very much get a kick out of.
Yeah, there's something strange about the consultee relationship that I'm still trying to decipher. Which I think it has the potential of being something really great, but also like people don't usually really like consultants, right? And you've been pretty vocal about it and have written about it a little bit recently. Why do you think there's some antagonism to the idea of consulting?
Businesses have grown incredibly tired of consultants, and rightly so.
Yeah.
Because fundamentally, we live in an industry that has, for whatever the reason, for whatever the organic evolution reason, has grown to accept a whole series of conflicts of interest and within the industry, and live with it as if it were the norm and as if it were right. And so there's all kinds of conflicts of interest. And one of the first, let's say the straw that broke the camel's back, in my case, that really convinced me, okay, I need to go and do it myself, because this is really crap, was because was experiencing on client side getting really poor consultancy and from some third party. And not only that consultancy was supposed to be unbiased and then turned out not to be so. And because there were, secondary kickbacks or whatever, referral schemes and so on. So if you're a consultant that whether you're an independent or you're a bigger organization and you're supposed to help your client, whether a brand, a retailer, or whatever, to take the right strategic decision and pick, for example, the right partner to develop a website, to develop an app, to whatever it is. And as a consultant, you have secondary interest in recommending A or B. Well, that's a pretty disgusting practice, which I find highly unethical.
I remember speaking to you when we when I first started kind of my my thinking about my business process, and you were very kind of strongly in favor of not taking any kickbacks, and that made a lot of sense to me. It's sort of normal now, right? Like the clients don't even bat an eye when you do that.
I think they don't bat an eye, or it's kind of a don't ask, don't tell. And which is just as it shares the guilt, because then sometimes some people on client sides take the path of least resistance because it makes their life easier. They have one less thing to think about,
Right.
and so I guess I always take aside from finding it highly unethical myself, and I also go back and think the business that you're giving a biased recommendation because of whatever kickback you're getting, that decision, because it's it's a strategic decision, could be a technology, a partner, or whatever it is, may have a very negative knock-on effect on the performance of that business down the line. There's people, poor performance could turn into people losing their jobs, could turn into a whole sort of things. And so not taking into consideration ethically second and third order kind of consequences, I think is, first of all, is short-sighted. Because consultancy is a reputation business. It takes a second to ruin a reputation. Like a lot of other people, I could sit down and list a bunch of companies that do that, and people know it. And so then ultimately, it's not even from a selfish point of view, it just doesn't pay off, and it's highly unethical. So if you play in that game and you do that, that's certainly something. I mean, I fight that in the market by simply making it front and center a key part of our manifesto of what we do. And as a boutique strategy firm, we put our money where our mouth is, and follow through. That's why there's businesses that love us, businesses that hate us, because we got agencies fired, agencies hired. I don't care, because at the end of the day, the only thing I care is the brand and the retailer and the client. Because if that helps them increase their chances of success, there isn't just my invoices being paid. There's a happy client, there's a happy business, there's people who enjoy their job better, and in a tiny way contributes to has a positive ripple effect. So maybe I'm too idealistic, but that's part of what I love of the freedom of running my own thing, is I set the rules and the rules that I want to play by. But there's a whole other series of conflicts of interest as well.
Yeah, though staying with this one for a minute, because after we spoke, I actually had a chance. So I got a call from someone I know who's very senior at a very large publicly traded company, and he asked me for a recommendation on a development partner. And at the same time, we were also talking about maybe doing a design partnership. And I followed your advice, and I spent a couple of hours just researching and kind of looking at my contacts, and sent them like 4 companies that I thought might be a good fit. And then, but I also wrote, just so you know, I'm not taking any kickback. This is, this is just based on my current understanding of your needs, right? And also to the company that they ended up choosing, and this is a big project. So, any sort of kickback could have been significant. In fact, probably could have made my year. I feel like both parties are just so grateful. Both parties definitely would consider working with me again, and larger collaborations are in the works, and I feel great about basically not being biased, and I could have probably pushed more strongly towards one of the larger partners because they would have probably paid more. And the client ended up choosing someone smaller but who is probably more better for them, and I feel good about it. I feel and the same, like maybe I got infected with your idealism, but again, it's my mistake to make, right? And it's my business, and I feel better about it.
Absolutely. First of all, I'm honored to have
Yeah.
triggered, I've played a little part in that. Second,
Yeah.
I think it's going for the positive sum game as opposed to the zero sum game. And
Right.
if you have your own business and you're lucky enough to be able to keep doing your own business and growing your own business, then it would be silly, to say the least, try to focus, at least in my opinion, try to focus on short-term zero-sum games with short-term gains as opposed to trying to play the long game, because in a service industry like ours, like yours, like mine, positive sum games compound over time. And so, whilst we might have left on the table sizable referral fees if we went down if we ever went down the road, you know, I am a firm believer that that compounds over time to get into bigger and stronger and better opportunities later on, which make you happier.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, when I need to be able to look myself in the mirror and be happy, aside from the looks with what I see, and go to bed,
Yeah.
knowing that I've respected every player in the game that I've played with, and not taken sterile advantage in the short term.
No, I hear that. Yeah, I mean, that's so right. And from a designer's perspective, there's a minefield for a designer. Just like for a strategy officer, when you're working with a client, especially if you're in any sort of relationship with a development partner. And I saw that you've written about it from a strategy perspective. It's just the same with design, right? Like, as a designer, my role is to solve the problem as simply and effectively and elegantly as possible.
Yeah.
And it might not need a lot of development or any development, right? Sometimes I can find something that out of the box that just does what you need. That's what you should use, right? And it's zero code, and you're not paying any more money to the agency.
Exactly. And that's the other kind. Sorry if I interrupted there, but that's the other kind of conflict of interest. That's a whole other kind, which is bundling strategy and development, or bundling design and prototyping, and then development and execution, integrations with everything that comes. So in that, both your business and mine are very similar, because we basically both decided to decouple the initial definition of the strategic objectives and design objectives and design strategy and prototypization,
Yeah.
decoupling it from the actual execution of the big development, the big integrations, and that comes after. What that does is takes out of the equation the other conflict of interest, which is any agency who tries to sell a strategy, tries to sell a design or an experience, as good as they are, they will always have somewhat of a bias, conscious or unconscious, towards making something bigger, because obviously the development makes the size of the project, makes it more complicated, more complex, and there's more work, more mandates to invoice, and we've all seen that.
Yeah.
By decoupling that, like you're doing with your business, like I'm doing with mine, we fundamentally don't care if the actual execution of it requires, like you were saying, a simpler way of doing things. And therefore, it's only in the interest of the client, I believe, decoupling that.
Yeah.
And then do the homework beforehand, like I usually call it. Do the homework beforehand, decide your strategy beforehand, make sure it fits with your ambition, with your real ambition. Probe that you have that your ambition and your potential and also your capacity, both in terms of financial and skills wise, are the right fit for your ambition and what you want to achieve. Then go and see what is the right kind of solution, what is the right kind of technology, kind of partners, and get into strategic procurement to get the best people to do the job. And in your case, it's the same thing: is let's prototype fast, early. Let's get something in your hands where you can get a clearer idea of what you want and how you want it executed, regardless with any interest whatsoever as to the degree of complexity. Does it take 10 days or 100 days to execute or not? So I'm a big fan of new business models, so to speak, cut the pie horizontally as opposed to vertically.
Yeah, it disaggregates and unbundled these services in a way that makes sense. Because I mean, I find that clients don't really understand that, and like the number of times that I have clients come to me and say, "Oh, you're not offering the full package."
Yeah.
Nobody's offering a good full package, because that doesn't exist, right? Because that's an inherent conflict of interest. And honestly, like, I'm trying to paint them a picture where I'm saying, look, if you hire a development agency that also has a designer, that designer is working under very strict restrictions. So for instance, they cannot recommend that you don't build the thing, even if they believe it's a terrible idea. They cannot recommend that you spend even a few more days in discovery and design, than whatever was framed for them, right? So they might have a framework of, oh, you have 20 hours for this, and that's all they're getting paid for. So they're not going to do more than that, even if you think you need a couple of weeks more. And they can't, and if they find a brilliant solution that reduces your 3 months of development to 2 weeks of development, it's not that, I was always like, I never cared. I always cared more about my reputation and my honesty than anything else. I would always say these things, but I would get in trouble in every situation, right?
Absolutely.
Just like understanding that this is hiring the person who's there to help you figure out what the truth of the situation is from the same company that then has to act on it.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work.
So, and I loved reading your article about it, and we'll include a link to it. But you identified a couple more different types of conflicts of interest. So, do you want to kind of detail them, or yeah?
One is the like we said, the kickbacks and which is awful. The other one is the development, where it's bundled, that you cannot have a fair assessment of which direction you should go and design and strategy. And then there's other ones. So there's one which is about the classic consultancy, what I call the gray suits kind of consultancies, where they, the big guys, they come in, they shake your hands, they sell you. They, aside from the insane billing, but they come in and sell you a certain kind of strategy. But then because they never stick around to drive the execution of those strategies, they fundamentally drop on the table on the desk of the senior executive team a 9 out of 10 times unrealistic plan, which let alone the fact that 99 out of 100 times it's a plan that basically it's telling a challenger brand how the leader is doing. So it's basically copy what this other brand is doing. And so the premise is just completely wrong from the get-go, because they have these gigantic databases of case studies, because they're big and they have all that information. So the premise is wrong to begin with. But beyond that, I've seen way too many times big consultancies delivering this kind of strategies and roadmaps that they point you toward a wrong objective, because even if you were able to achieve it, by the time you get there, you're behind again because the leader has moved in the meanwhile. So wrong premise. But second, because there's a whole series, of course, there's the politics and there's the agendas of CEOs and so on and so forth. They set a promise of achievement of certain strategies without getting the buy-in from the senior executive team that is actually going to have to execute it. And basically becomes a new project that lands on their desk and that they need to be able to absorb and execute on their own, in addition to the business as usual, which nowadays, as we all know, business as usual is not really as usual anymore. There's plenty of existing challenges in retail and in other spaces. So fundamentally, they deliver, they overpromise, they set the target wrong, they overpromise, and they don't stick around. So they have a conflict of interest in selling something which is hardly ever achievable, and as achievable, they sell it as achievable, and they don't stick around to actually at least provide the leadership and coordination to execute, to bring that to life. So they don't put their face on their reputation on the line to drive the business to make that thing happen. And that's another thing that I could never stand. And working for a variety of brands in all different capacities, I've seen all sorts of things of these big consultancies, and that's definitely something that was a further reason that pushed me in that direction. And that's why with my firm we do the strategy and the business planning, but then we also provide the leadership to that is necessary to stick around and put our face to the direction of that. Although we don't do anything else of the, like we were saying, it's decoupled. It's from everything else, but at least we are in the trenches with them and helping them drive and coordinate and provide that kind of leadership. So there was the yeah, they disappear, and then 9 out of 10 times, probably more, the plan fails, and the fault is taken by your senior executive team or your middle management, because it was just never set up to succeed to begin with, aside the fact that the objective was wrong because it was pointing in the wrong direction.
We're saying like about this conflict of interest and like the gray suits, and I was just saying, is strategy ever really over? Like, because strategy feels like something that has to continuously adapt to new information, right? And new situation and new competitor moves. So how can someone just drop a massive plan and walk away?
Strategy, the way I see it, is a compass. Sure, you should, ignoring competitors, I don't think it's a wise thing to do, but certainly shouldn't be just about looking or what competitors are doing. And on the opposite is, nothing new here. It's very much, what does your target market really need? How do you
Right.
how can you change the game by changing the service model? How can you change the game by changing your proposition? And asking all those tough questions that sometimes clients aren't really ready to ask, let alone to answer. And so, but that's where the
Right.
real value is added, is where you really try to push, in a sense, the boundary of what should be done. I think there's when you look at digital transformation, however you may want to call it, is there are elements of hygiene, so to speak, things that need to be done just because that's just the price to play. So a certain kind of infrastructure, certain kind of team skill level in house, certain kind of partners, and so on. So that's just really just the price to play. If you don't even have that, that is fit for what your ambitions are, then let's not talk about anything disruptive or particularly innovative, because you don't have a solid starting point. And then beyond the hygiene, so to speak, side of things, there is, okay, how can we change the game by not just copying the first in the class, but trying to shift and focus on what the real strengths of the business are, and investing on those, and investing on what the market really wants. And so there's no one size fits all. There's no silver bullet. It's a method. It's not. That's why it particularly pisses me off seeing pre-baked strategies delivered by these kind of players, and then just copy what the number one, number two are doing, and you'll be fine. Hell no, that's the opposite of. It's going to be the opposite of fine. So, and it's never done, it's never completed, like you're saying. It's a moving target, it's a general compass. It's about learning, teaching the organization how to learn, as opposed to teaching the organization just what to learn. So it's in a way, I guess, it's how the education system should be, teaching less the what and teaching more the how, teaching less what to learn, teaching more the how to learn.
Right.
Those who can do that are ready to play and have an edge, because they can respond, they can turn on a
Yeah.
dime, genuinely focus on creating value for their customers, which in turn becomes value for their business and their employees, and it becomes a positive sum game, as opposed to, hey, let's just try to win, to beat a competitor or to copy them, and so on. Those are sterile techniques that
Right.
don't even deserve the word strategy, and which is, by the way, a very abused term.
I want to get into what strategy really is with you in a minute. But so before I do, so you named in your article four different conflicts of interest, types of conflicts of interest. The fourth one was just the way media agencies are rewarded for their spend, basically as a percentage of their spend. Which obviously get like just direct financial conflict of interest, because they're incentivized to be inefficient and spend more, kind of directly. And so some of these things are so absurd in terms of conflict of interest that I want to ask, why do people underestimate conflict of interests like so terribly, given that it drives everything. It drives every decision that the consultant. I mean, it's not a cynical thing to say that we respond to our incentives, right? And yeah, it's the biggest factor in your relationship with another entity is what are they incentivized to do. So why do people underestimate that, do you think?
I think there's fundamentally the inertia of how things have been going on. It's a relic, I believe, particularly on the media media buying fee structures, is a relic of the Madman days where you could buy media through agencies in virtue of the special relationships that they had with the media owners. Otherwise, you couldn't get space on your out of home or you're on TV or on print and so on and so forth. And obviously that's changed a lot. I mean, some degrees of influence are there, but particularly, as we all know, when you look at pure digital, that's dramatically changed. So because agencies have been always operating like that, they keep trying operating like that. I can tell you that some of the projects where we brought the biggest impact on big clients were in restructuring this kind of fee structures, not just driving the strategic procurement into better partners, so firing some and hiring new ones, but also in changing the fee models. So, and there's in the media space, there's so much more. So there's the insanity of the media buying model where agencies are paid a percentage of the media that they buy on your behalf. So, of course, it's a conflict of interest, and it should instead be based on full-time equivalent and the effort actually spent, so that they don't have as much of an incentive making you spend 100K, 500K more than you had in the budget. And then there is this kind of splits into a variety of other conflicts of interest, because obviously then media agencies get special rebates from some media owners versus others, and they get kickbacks of other sort, and the client never really has any visibility of that. And so even though charging on FTE isn't necessarily, it resolves part of the problem of the conflict, the biggest one probably. It doesn't resolve the whole problem, because if a media agency gets a better referral fee and kickback and rebate, whatever, whichever shape or form, from one media owner versus another, obviously they will opt for one over the other in recommending within, particularly the bigger the budgets, the bigger the media plans, the more likely something like this is to happen. So transparency on that is very far from having been achieved, let alone, let's not even go down the road of all the ad frauds and all that in digital, because that's a whole other kind of worm. And then I think there's another big one, which is the lack of accountability of content versus media. And so agencies that do, on top of everything else, agencies that do just the media buying versus agencies that do just the creative campaign creatives, you have basically, if a campaign succeeds, everybody's happy. You pop a bottle of champagne at the end of the season, and everyone is happy. When campaigns don't go as well, there's never clear accountability on the agency side on who dropped the ball, because you'll have the content creative agency obviously blaming the media targeting, the poor media targeting that the other agency did, and the media agency blaming the poor content quality and so on and so forth. And so the client always gets the shortest end of the stick and never, So it's not really any surprise that all the big agency groups, WPP, Omnicom, Publicis, have been struggling dramatically in the last years because just like executives have lost faith in the big consultancies, they've lost faith in the big agencies, and the new, small, hungry, up and coming that are more agile and are able to adapt and truly focus on the needs of the business are the ones who are slowly eroding market share from these bigger guys, and new operating model, which I think is brilliant because that's the survival of the fittest, right? So it's not the strongest that survives; it's the fittest. So yeah, I guess we'll see. But it's exciting times if you're on the other side of the of this, where you're seeing really exciting new businesses like yours and addressing addressing the market in a more intelligent, more flexible, and a more focused way than the old inert way of doing
hopefully
things.
so as we were kind of talking about like why are these conflicts happening. I had a thought. I wonder what you think about it. Is like we're seeing the effects of conflicts of interest between the employee and their company, right? Like the benefit of hiring like a single point of contact, single consultant just claims to do everything. The benefit of not having to work hard or worry about it comes to the employee. The cost of like just the massive failure of this falls on the company. And most employees, even in key positions, are not owners. To me, that maybe is a part of the fundamental restructuring that has to happen, is like make sure that your employees are aligned with you, because they are the ones hiring all these consultants who are then not aligned with you.
There is a wrong business culture. So I'm going to go through a couple of examples like kind of archetypes of situations in which this happens. There's the case in which a business has the wrong culture of not completely trusting their senior executives or middle managers in a certain role, and instead then taking the hard but better way forward of saying, hey, this isn't working, we need someone better to do this job. So reallocating that person, or even letting them go and finding someone who is stronger, that can be trusted to lead a certain discipline, a certain departments. They take the path of least resistance of getting some big consultancy to come in and assess something and fundamentally achieve the same result that sometimes your internal leader had achieved, but just with the branded with the credibility, so to speak, of the big consultancy, which ends up being not oftentimes a waste of budget. Then there's an issue from the bottom, which is, or the middle, whichever, which is just wanting to maintain the status quo, not wanting to really push the I don't want to say the envelope, but just push for some change and some evolution, and that can be rooted into just the person not liking their job anymore, not being motivated, not having the right incentives, not being confident enough, having lost the ambition, not caring enough anymore, and so on and so forth. And so they become kind of guardians of the status quo. And and that's the worst thing ever. And in that case, you need a disruptive force. So if you're the senior manager and you're not getting that change from inside, then in the interest of time, you need the disruptive force of someone from outside coming in and so on.
Interesting. So we started talking last time we spoke about the convergence of strategy and design. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that and kind of how are they different? How are they the same? Is there a difference? What's happening in the world of strategy and design?
I think the biggest thing that's happening in the strategy and design is what we touched upon. So the unbundling more and more of that part of the early part of the process, and a shift in the business models of people in the service industry like ourselves, in the B2B service industry like ourselves, and also the way that clients are slowly learning to operate in. There's a lot of evolution on the business model side of things, with things like what you're doing with your firm, what I'm doing with my firm. But I think there's going to be even more changes and innovation on the business model side of things as things evolve. The more strategists as well as designers get detached from the, let's say, the physical execution of the following steps, although engaged in the leadership to make sure that the initial vision is actually brought to life, the more value is going to be created for businesses. At the same time, another driver that I would like to see more and more is an evolution of the business models of these kind of businesses, where there is more skin in the game in these kind of engagements, where you get closer and closer to the core of the real value that is created, and the incentives therefore get more and more aligned. I think we are in an evolution. I mean, if I take a step back and look at the industry, I think we are in a, we had the old way of doing things, which we've talked at length about, the main kind of sins and issues there, and conflicts of interest. You have new generation kind of businesses in the service space like ours, where we remove the big conflicts of interest to be able to be unbiased and have the interest of our clients at heart. I think there will be a further step in the next years, and I'm keeping my eyes and ears very open to learn and be able to evolve as well, where more skin in the game is becomes part of the way these kind of businesses are engaged, and therefore getting those incentives and objectives even more aligned. And that's where the majority of the positive sum games are going to be played. How and which shape that's going to have, I've been toying with a variety of ideas, more or less feasible, and that vary from small startup business to large corporation. Haven't necessarily landed on a specific formulation yet, but watch this space.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, and there's a lot of equivalence. So, in the design space, some really interesting people are starting to talk about design as a kind of equity, as a kind of investment, and wanting to kind of start where your portfolio of projects is also a financial structure,
Mm-hmm.
where you have a small stake in these companies. And on the other hand, I see a lot of big strategy companies and big consulting companies like McKinsey and Accenture just buying a ton of little smaller design agencies And so they're like, they understand, like maybe the clients don't understand yet sometimes, but the big consulting firms understand the design and strategy. They want to own it. They want, because they know it's the same thing to some extent.
What those big acquisitions fail to understand is that they're buying leaking buckets.
Oh, that's for sure. That is for sure. Because I'm not staying in McKinsey. If they ever acquired me, oh my God, nobody will stay. Yeah, no designer from a small agency will stay at McKinsey. That's just never going to happen.
They're hiring. They're basically acquiring leaking buckets because even the example of, I believe it was Accenture buying Droga5 a few months ago. I mean, creative people are not going to stick around being managed by gray suits, and that may seem like a generalization, but there's already a high turnover of personnel in amongst the agency world, and so that's going to happen. So I think it's the classic acquisition, a classic strategic move that looks great on a PowerPoint slide in a boardroom, and it's going to turn out not really working out. But they're trying. At least they're trying to do something else, whilst the big guys are suffering and losing and market share, and the big agency groups. So it's one way to go, but it's certainly not the solution.
Interesting. Interesting perspective. So, okay, so we've talked for a while. So I have a couple of kind of standard questions I like to ask. That are actually from the design sprints, from Jake Knapp's design sprint, and it kind of helps put everything in perspective. So when you look at your business and where you are right now and where you came from, what is your most optimistic vision for yourself and your business for 2 years from now? If everything goes your way and you got every wish and just everything you're trying turns out to be a great success, what does the world look like for you in 2 years?
I believe we will stick to our guns, and the kind of approach for Atelier Avenue, my firm, and continue in that direction, which is an adaptive direction of providing the services in a very thoughtful and genuinely with keep on putting our money where our mouth is, and all those things that we discussed, and staying true to those values and keep growing. We've been growing so well, mostly organically, really, over the last years. So I think when it comes to Atelier Avenue, I don't have the ambition to make it not a big, not even a medium-sized consultancy business, because I want to remain. I care too much about the quality of the delivery, and therefore I will stay in the trenches doing the delivery with my colleagues, with the rest of the team, because that's the only way I can guarantee the high level of delivery, which ultimately is what brought us business over the years. Because I think apart from a couple of £1,000 in building a website, I've never really spent anything in marketing, as it's all been reputation, referral, and word of mouth. The future is going to look, if everything goes the way I like, the future will likely have much more involvement from me on the investment side of things, both angel investment as well as closer collaborations with VCs, which we already have, and which is a part that I genuinely enjoy a lot.
Cool. And so now I'm going to take off your optimistic hat and put on your most pessimistic hat for a moment. What are three things that could stop you from getting there, that you think you really have to figure out in order to get to that future?
Frankly, given the agile nature of the business and the talent we have on board and the relationships built, the big hurdles are going to be exogenous as opposed to endogenous, as in this space it's more likely to be if there's another big financial contraction from a macroeconomics point of view. If you look at the latest charts, the way spread has been spread between the short and long-term bonds has been evolving. It's starting to show quite a scary trend. So that's something that needs to be taken into consideration. And if we're going to have another big crisis, financial crisis, and so on, obviously we're all going to suffer that. Brexit is another big incognita. Most people more or less understand nowadays what the big downsides are going to be. We're already suffering some downsides. Anybody who has interests in British pounds is already suffering the downside of Brexit with exchange rate. So I think those two are the biggest threats, because the rest is very much in the nature of thanks to the nature of the business and how we are, and we're so agile and so light that we are quite anti-fragile from that point of view, to use an expression of coined by one of my favorite authors, Taleb. So yes, I guess that's it. Which aren't small things. If once they come, those black swans, they're gonna hit and hit hard. We've seen in 2008.
I always remind myself, I'm reading this book. It's exactly one of the books that I'm reading currently. I like to read like 5 books at a time, so that's one of them. But I always have like in mind, like it's really helpful to have in mind the idea that I can always just leave everything and join a Buddhist monastery for a couple of years, because that sounds actually strangely attractive to me when I'm really stressed. Just like, just go take your bowl, beg for food, go meditate every day. So it's that's, to me, that's the ultimate anti-fragility, right? Is like you're not even afraid of not having money at all for a while. But hopefully that will not just happen out of necessity.
It's a state of mind. It's mostly a state of mind, and and preparation and confidence that one way or another will be able to, even in the worst kind of recession, we'd be able to apply our skills and in a way that we would be able to, put food on the table and a roof over our heads. So I guess you become a bit anti-fragile. The more you run your own little business, the more you realize that there's a lot that we've been taught by society and by peer pressure and whatever, that certain things are must-haves, that you should feel bad if you don't have, or you are not in a certain way. And the older I get, the more I work and live as an independent, the more I realize of how much of that is just BS, and what truly matters is are very few things.
Before closing, you that you just opened a whole venue. What are the things that truly matter?
What truly matters are those things that have resisted centuries and millennia. So the people you love, the freedom of being where you want to be, with who you want to be, and health at the end of the day are genuinely the only things that matter. And I guess growing older, the more you're exposed, like everyone, to the more difficult things in life, the more you realize what truly matters. And a lot of what we do in the everyday life is just noise. And one thing that I firmly believe is that the biggest bug of the human operating system, so to speak, is the cyclical loss of perspective of what truly matters. We get hurt, someone close to you gets sick, or something bad happens. That's life, unfortunately. In those moments we realize, oh shit, all those things that were stressing us out really mean nothing, completely pale in comparison with what truly matters. And you manage to stay, focused in that, mindset for some time, for weeks. And then, one way or another, you get sucked in again into the wrong way of seeing things, and you lose perspective of what truly matters. So I generally think that's the biggest OS bug that we humans have. I mean, not all of us, someone can, Eastern cultures teach us that it's possible to actually maintain that, but it's a muscle that needs to be trained, and our society is teaching us exactly the opposite.
Yeah, for sure. You're making me feel guilty about arguing with my mother over the phone today. I was like, "Mom, I can't come over for the weekend. I don't have time." But no, I totally agree, and it's good to remember that, and it's good to have people who remind you of that. So I guess before we wrap up, where can our listener find you, or where would you want them to go to connect?
So, well, our listeners can find me on Twitter at Saverio Bianchi, which is at SaverioBian, like November, CHI. Looking me up on LinkedIn, or checking out the Atelier and Avenue.com website. One thing that I will be working more and more in the next months is more of a personal blog, which I'm thinking of finally starting, as opposed to the business company one. And so,
looking forward to it. Yeah, that's definitely. You have a lot of really interesting thoughts, and some of them maybe don't even just fall into the business category. So thank you so much for taking the time, Saverio. It was a great conversation, and a pleasure as always.
Likewise, Aaron. Thank you so much again for having me on your podcast. Can't wait to listen to all the episodes.
All right, that's it for today. If you enjoyed the podcast and would like to support it, please consider writing a 5-star review in Apple's podcast app or wherever you're listening. It helps many more people discover the podcast and also makes us feel good. Current support for the podcast comes from my own design company, Remake Labs. We run design sprints all over the world, and our goal is to improve outcomes, whether in business or various organizations, through repeated and rapid design interventions. Now, until next time, be well, everyone. See you next week on Remake.